when you sit on your glorious throne, we want to sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left. So James and John, sitting under the teachings of Jesus, are revealing their hearts with this favor. Jesus, we would like you to put us into a position of exaltation before men. We want people to look at us and see and recognize our rule and authority next to you. So Jesus in verse 38 tells them plainly, you don't know what you are asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I'm about to drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism of suffering I must be baptized with? So let's pause. What is Jesus talking about here? Clearly I think we could understand that these two disciples don't know what they're asking. They're thinking of Jesus' earthly kingdom. They're wanting to sit on the right and left of his throne. Jesus has the eternal perspective. Yes, there's going to be those who sit on the right and the left. But guys, this is for all eternity, for all followers of God, for all devoted saints of all times. And you, fishermen, who are just learning your way through here, want to be exalted to the very highest positions. That's quite an ambitious undertaking that you're asking me here. And do you even understand what it would take to sit at the right and left hand of Christ as he reigns? I mean, this is for those who will have so purely loved the Lord in their life that the sacrifices that they made, the sharing in the sufferings of Christ. Paul writes in Romans 8 that if we're to share in the glory of Christ, we too must share in the sufferings of Christ. So Jesus is asking them, do you understand what you're asking? Are you prepared to share in my suffering? And he calls it the bitter cup of suffering. In the Old Testament, the cup always points to the divine judgment of sin, the cup of the wrath of God. Well, Jesus is saying, I must drink of that cup. Are you ready to drink of that suffering with me? And to be baptized is a very vivid word picture. It is to be plunged under. Are you willing to be plunged under the suffering like I'm going to be plunged into it? Do you two understand what you're asking me? In verse 39, oh yes, they replied, we're able. Oh my. So Jesus has this teaching about counting the cost. Clearly, out of watching his disciples process things, this teaching became necessary. Guys, you have to think before you speak. Here I am asking if you are able to even comprehend the level of suffering that I am going to go through and the level of suffering that those who will sit with me and reign with me and rule with me, what they must go through. And without even blinking, you say, yes, you're ready to go through that. You can't even comprehend what I'm speaking of. You're not making a connection here. Then Jesus told them, you will indeed drink from my bitter cup and be baptized with my baptism of suffering. Now remember, Jesus is talking to James and John. You might mark, this is a great place to mark a verse in your margin. Acts chapter 12, verse 2. James was the first martyr. Jesus knew that James indeed would partake of this suffering. He died by the sword. And John died as an exile, lonely, on a criminal's island. Not a pleasant place to be, not a fulfilling place to live out your retirement after years of following the Lord. This was a very, very hard, unforgiving place. And Jesus, of course, knows that they will taste of the suffering. They'll drink of that cup. They'll partake in that baptism. But he's assuring them, you don't know what you're saying. You're not counting the cost. You don't yet understand what I'm speaking of. Now, this is something important when it comes to the heart of service. Service, as Jesus is going to teach the disciples, costs you something. I have found this when it comes to people and service. Everybody's willing to serve unless it's going to be an inconvenience in some way to them, unless it's going to require energy, unless it's going to require that I be dependable and put myself out there for others. We're quick to say, oh yes, count me in. But those with a genuine servant's heart who count the cost of serving in Jesus' name are rare finds. But church family, we want to be among them. We want to look for ways to serve. So Jesus continues his teaching here. He says, yes, you will indeed drink of my bitter cup. You'll be baptized in my baptism of suffering, but I have no right to say who will sit on my right or my left. God has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen. Now some people are bothered by this statement. When Jesus says, I have no right to say who will sit on my right or my left, well, isn't Jesus God? Why would Jesus, the King of Heaven, say something like this, like he has no right to say this? Well, he explains it. He's explaining to his disciples, guys, this isn't the stuff of favors. You don't just ask me as a favor if you get to sit on my right hand and those are the most exalted places that you are speaking of, that God has sovereignly chosen for those who have lived a life worthy of a position and place like that. I am not in a position to just hand that out to a friend as a favor. God has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen. I'm sorry, guys, I can't call you in a favor on something like this.